Hey everybody, this is my 55-gallon gourami tank, and while the angelfish is front and center at the moment, you will notice my moonlight gourami is kind of lying on the leaves off to the left there in the middle of the screen. And she's doing that because she's got an issue with her swim bladder. I don't want to say it's an infection, that's not necessarily the case, but her swim bladder is not working properly. And that's causing her to lose buoyancy. She's basically just sinking in the water column, and she has to exert energy constantly to stay afloat, as it were. Now, I've had issues with other fish where it was the other way around. Their swim bladder inflated like a balloon, and they couldn't get their tail end down. They just swam around with their tail fins sticking up out of the water, and they usually don't last too long that way. The ones that can hang on for quite a while with the swim bladder issue are the ones like this that can find ways to prop themselves up, or they swim in the water constantly. I had a skirt tetra that had swim bladder issues. I had it for about 3 years before it finally died. So one of the things I want to discuss with the swim bladder issue here is the fact that shelled peas are often recommended as a treatment for swim bladder issue, and I want to talk a little bit more in depth specifically about that, because that can be helpful, but it can also be misleading. Shelled peas don't really have any impact whatsoever on the swim bladder. What shelled peas do is provide the fish with some roughage so that if it's constipated, it will help get things moving again. And a lot of times the swim bladder issue will actually be a secondary issue stemming from constipation, especially when you get fish like gouramis that are primarily vegetation. Early in my fish keeping days, I loved one of my gouramis to death. I kept giving it treats and feeding it bloodworms, and it wound up getting constipated because it had such a high protein diet and I didn't give it enough vegetation to eat. It got constipated, and eventually, as anything will, if it's, it doesn't get relief, it finally died. And so constipation is a fairly common issue with fish. And a common secondary ailment that stems from the constipation is swim bladder issues. So that's why it's generally recommended, if you've got swim bladder issues, that you should give your fish shelled peas. That's just sort of a throw it out there. It's certainly not going to hurt. If nothing else, your fish are going to get a nice meal of some shelled peas. But if the fish isn't constipated, that's going to have absolutely no impact whatsoever on the swim bladder. And it's very likely, especially in this case with this gourami, that I'm not having any kind of issues with constipation. When a fish gets constipated, you notice. And I'm talking about being constipated enough that it actually is starting to cause secondary problems. A little bit of minor irregularity isn't going to cause your fish to have swim bladder issues, excuse me, or anything else. When a fish is constipated to the point where you're getting swim bladder issues, you know it. You can see it. The fish is abnormally swollen. Its cloaca or its vent, whatever you call it on a fish, is usually red and swollen. It might even look prolapsed, sort of poking out. And that's the kind of level of constipation you really need to see before you are typically going to start seeing those secondary issues like swim bladder issues and whatnot. And as we just saw with this fish as it swam to the surface, I hope you got a good look at that, it doesn't even have a remotely swollen belly. In fact, over the last couple of weeks, I've been kind of thinking she's looking pretty thin. She's getting a little bit older. You can see she's just wafer thin. She's almost 5 years old now. And, it's not unusual for fish that age to just start having issues. Like anything else that gets old, they just start having issues. It's my little chocolate gourami making an appearance right there. So I think that could be it. It could be something specific, something caused her to have issues or something like that. It could be old age related. I don't know. But other than keeping the tank clean, there's not a lot I can do about it, or there's not a lot I'm going to do about it, I should say. I suppose I could catch her and get her out of there and try to medicate her and all that kind of stuff. But I think putting her through that stress would probably be worse off. I've never yet had a fish recover from a swim bladder issue, and in her case, at 5 years old, I'm simply not going to worry about it. If she fades away and we lose her over time, then that's just how it goes, you know. As far as this tank goes, not counting the original gouramis that were in here, because I originally tried to get this tank set up with a school of, or a group, or whatever you would call it, of opaline gouramis. I had 6 opalines in here at one point, and eventually I gave up on that idea and got it down to, well, it was a different tank than it is now. It had a lot of different gouramis in it, but out of that batch of those original gouramis, she's the last one. The other gouramis that are in this tank have been added fairly recently, so she's the old lady of the tank, and everybody else in there is fairly new. Now the loaches are kind of old. My catfish on the bottom is even older than the gourami. You can actually just barely see the tail of my striped Raphael sticking out right there. He just lives in that cave all the time. He's probably over 5 now. He might even be pushing 6. He's probably my oldest fish, you know, or one of my oldest fish. I got a Corydoras upstairs that I got around the same time in my very, very early days of fish keeping. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that and clarify what I meant by... Yep, just got told my battery is about to die, so I'm going to be wrapping this up. But I got my point across. Shelled peas have no impact on the swim bladder proper. Shelled peas will help with constipation, so if you're having a secondary issue with the swim bladder because of constipation, then shelled peas are your way to go. And of course, in the long run, shelled peas aren't going to hurt. Whether it helps or not doesn't matter. It's certainly not going to hurt. So it's never a bad idea to offer shelled peas if you do have a fish that's not feeling well. So thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe. Don't forget, this one is my gourami tank. See you real soon in the next one.